Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to follow up with a quick video today, starting to talk about the circular motion of light and zero-point energy. I don't know how many of you guys were able to see my last video, which I posted last night, which was a gematria reading, which I did sort of on the fly during the video. And during that reading, it was really interesting what had happened because there was a couple different messages specifically related to the information that I've received, which I have not released yet. And one of those things was talking about a great archaeological discovery which had been kept secret, and that was something I started to talk about last night. That was the Hidden Mystery School's temple, which they have actually underneath the what's called the grip of the lion's paw, which is the wrist of the paw of the Sphinx in Egypt. And we talked about that and what that would contain and all that stuff. But we also saw an interesting message that said that I should go forth and speak about the circular motion of light. And I commented that, well, since science doesn't even really accept that light moves in a circular motion, it was interesting that that message came forth. And I proposed to anybody who is listening, just sort of an interesting piece of evidence that, I asked, is this something that somebody's telling me? Is this a direct message? Is this coincidence? Is this my imagination? And I let it up to you guys to decide. But I will tell you, I really just don't believe in coincidences anymore. There's just been too many things that have happened to me in my life, and I've had this sort of accelerated learning program, trial by fire, whether I liked it or not. And as a result of that, I've had to accept that there's a lot of things in this world that aren't what I thought they were. And now that I'm starting to see and understand for the very first time, it's amazing because, the world is actually a pretty cool place, an amazing, beautiful place that we're so wrapped up in our own individual darkness in our lives that we're these sort of dark existences which are being cast upon us. Not a lot of us get to see that. So it's interesting because the entire universe, in fact, is made out of light matter, okay? I know there's a lot of people who theorized different versions of that before, but I assure you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that everything is made out of a sort of light particle, which I call atomus. I say I call, but in truth, everything that I'm about to tell you today is information that is not something that I came up with. It's not something that I designed or created. I can't take any credit for any of this whatsoever. I think, in all honesty, someone like Pythagoras or perhaps Einstein or a variety of others who might still be lingering within the collective consciousness invented this information, and I simply remembered it, if you want to call it that. I accessed it through gematria initially. That was where I got my clues that there was something going on, and I had received an interesting message on an online forum, which I alluded to the other day. And all of these things began to get me to look at the circular motion of light, which led me to discover something quite amazing. And that's that pi, as we're using it today, I don't know if it was originally created that way, but I really, now that I've looked at it, I doubt it. Pi, by its very nature, limits our ability to achieve perpetual motion. Let me repeat that. Pi, which is a function used to calculate the circumference of a circle, by design, at least in its current state, systemically prevents us from achieving perpetual motion. Now, why is that? It's actually very simple if you think about it. Everyone knows that pi goes on forever and ever and ever, right? What does that really mean practically at the end of the day? What that means is that it's constantly dividing smaller and smaller, right? Like it's fractioning away. It never, ever stops fractioning, and therefore it sort of acts as a worm, which, with each rotation of a circle, limits potential. Okay? It prevents us from achieving what is known as unity or over unity, depending on what you're going for. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the pi symbol, and I realize a variety of different fonts have slightly different styles, but if you look at most of the original pi symbols, you will notice that it sort of looks like a broken pillar with a desecrated infinity symbol rest atop it. Once you realize that, it actually makes it quite a bit easier to draw. Okay, it's like a half of a figure eight set on top of a broken pillar. Well, that precisely describes exactly its function. Okay, and as long as we continue to use that, we will never achieve perpetual motion. I say to you, it is very likely that it has been manipulated and not accidentally. I'm pretty sure I know who manipulated it as well, but we'll get into that later. The point is, it has been manipulated in order to keep us from realizing our potential, in order from realizing free light energy and 0-point energy from the aether, which is something that I also discovered. So what is the aether? Many of you guys have heard of this before, and again, I'm speaking to a wide range of audiences, so bear with me here. I'm just kind of breaking it down, generally speaking. You guys are going to find it's really interesting how these symbols in this formula all work. Okay, a lot of this stuff is very symbolical on several different levels. So when we're talking about free energy formulas, and we're talking about formulas for the geometric dark pyramid, the thing that I had discovered, which led me to much of this information, right? So there is a pyramid which was left by somebody in the form of a puzzle, okay, using many of these geometric symbols. And in the course of unlocking this pyramid, I was able to discover the formulas for free energy and perpetual motion. I am not a quantum physicist by any stretch. I don't know calculus. I literally barely was able to do long division up until a few months ago. So keep that in mind when you're watching this. I don't claim to be at the level of Albert Einstein physics here. I just know what I know, and I know that we have been lied to, and I can show you that, and I can also show you formulas that'll open up your thinking to an entirely different type of quantum physics and light theory, and that's really what I'm looking for here, is to pique some interest and to get this information out there, whether it's exactly perfect or not, so that we can take people who are very experienced in this and actually do something positive with it. Okay, I believe very strongly that I was given this information in order to help humanity rise above our current situation so that we could free ourselves from the perils of burning fossil fuels forever. Because that's not a sustainable solution. I'm not even concerned about peak oil, and I'm not even talking about the pollution component, although that is terrible. I'm just saying it's not smart to just burn everything for an energy source all the time, regardless of what that is. That's not a sustainable solution. It's not good for the planet. What is good for the planet, and it is a good solution for our future in humanity, is developing free energy devices based upon the circular motion of light. Okay, this is what CERN is kind of all about in a way, although I don't think they're going to ever tell you that out in the open. In truth, now that I know what I know, I understand exactly what CERN is all about. I understand that light is not limited to the speeds in which we previously thought they were under E equals mc squared. I understand many things that make it so if we honestly just put a little bit of time and effort into this, we could very likely have free energy generation devices in many places where such energy is just not currently available, and at a price, mind you, that's going to blow anything with carbons out of the water. I mean, our entire economy is based on petroleum dollar, right? At least in the United States. That is not good. That is not good. If we can free ourselves from having to burn fossil fuels in order to perpetuate ourselves energetically, we can raise the entire level of frequency of this planet and perpetuate ourselves into a sort of a new age, truthfully. Places that aren't able to get access to good energy now, affordably, can have it. There won't be any more warring and fighting over oil. I mean, the ramifications are quite deep and good. So anyways, these symbols very much represent multiple things on multiple levels, and when you understand and start to see what I'm talking about, you'll see how this is sort of a universal system of everything which draws together different schools of thought. So this affects music, right? This affects art, this affects science and religion and everything else. And there can be parallels drawn from these equations that I'm going to be discussing with you here today to each of these other things that I'm talking about, in direct correlations to those things, because everything is connected, as I believe you will find out. So the core parts of this formula are based upon the idea of Adam and Eva, okay, or Adamus and Eva. Now, what that is very interesting, actually, because what we're looking at is a sort of a man-woman duality, right? Like a polarity of gender. So we have Adamus and Eva, each of which fulfill a different role in this function in order to create something greater that would not otherwise be achievable. Now, in this instance, the shape of these letters is actually extremely important, okay? And they actually have significance. If you were to, for instance, take the Eva symbol, which is people call omega, and if you were to take that and put it on top of the Adamus symbol, like literally just like plop it right on top so that the A goes all the way on the inside and that the little footies kind of match up, well, you're actually going to see some interesting things. And if actually you were to do that in a slightly different way, where the tip of the A were in the middle, in the center of the omega symbol, if it will, in that sort of circle part, that actually creates a sort of artistic type of infinite energy production. And I guess the only way I can describe that is it's a geometric infinity pattern. And you'll have to play around with that to see, but just know if you position it in that way, where the A is in the middle of the O, the tip of it, right, and the little footies are sticking out past the bottom in that case, and it starts to make like what looks like a ladder that's coming towards you at a perspective, right? Like if you keep extending that A out, and if you keep drawing omega symbols around every other ladder rung, you're going to notice you can basically do that infinitely outward and inward forever, and it creates this really interesting design. That's just one of the things you can do with it. There's so many more. But the point is, Adam and Eva are a team. They work as a team, and when they're working as a team in a union, they produce more Adamus. Okay? And that kind of makes sense within a relationship, right? Like they get married, right? Like there's fruits of their marriage which result in children, and these children go out in the world. Okay, so I mean, really, it's kind of cool how this all works, and you can see that it was designed to make sense across a variety of different times and to different people over different cultures with different understandings. Okay, it's really quite brilliant, actually. So Adam and Eva are individuals who have to join together in what's called a union, right, or a marriage union, which is kind of like multiplication, right? So if you put A and O right next to each other, now they're in a union of sorts, multiplying, and that is where the magic starts to happen when it comes to free energy. So if you could imagine for a moment that the atom, right, let's just take that little A symbol and shrink that down really tiny. All right, let's stuff that now inside of the omega symbol, and let's have that move around in sort of like a circular motion, okay? And bouncing around in there kind of haphazardly, but there it is. All right, now, depending on how wide this opening at the bottom is, will determine effectively the difficulty for that atom to escape, okay? That can be referred to as a couple different things, but I call it struggle or difficulty. struggle of output, challenge, whatever resonates with you, but it basically is the bottleneck of the output of that omega. That's the important thing to understand here. And you can literally take those feet and you can move them farther apart or closer together geometrically in order to experiment and see different results of that. You could close it off all the way and just have it go in there forever. So there's all different kinds of interesting things that can happen there, but the point is it bounces around until it hits the exit port, in which point it escapes and goes out into the world and becomes its own deal. Now, it's interesting, if you notice the infinity symbol, right? Like it's sort of a figure 8, right? Like it goes around a track in a loop, which can just go on and on and on forever and ever and ever, following pretty much that same exact pattern. Now, that's important when it comes to the generation of light energy. We need to be thinking about moving things in a circular motion. I have learned that depending on how much entropy you introduce into the situation will pretty much determine the output of additional light. And that is something that can be kind of come forth in a couple different ways. I think entropy can come in the form of tight bends and curves, all right? So like if you were to take something moving at a really flat, almost linear thing, and then all of a sudden, that thing which is moving really fast suddenly change its direction, but in a curve, in a different direction, I think that creates a lot of strain upon that in various ways, which can be called entropy, one of the several types of entropy, which creates many interesting effects. The interesting thing you have to realize is that just like real life and real life marriage, growth comes from struggle. Okay, growth comes from challenge. So unless you have challenge, unless you have struggle, you will pretty much just stay the same. And the same can be said of light and of everything else, really, for that matter. So keep that in mind when we're talking about this. Now, I'm just trying to explain the concepts behind this for you guys in the know who are more scientific, because I think with these keys, you should be able to take this idea and run with it in ways that I couldn't even possibly envision. Okay? Now, think about the figure 8 as we're talking about this. It's a little bit like if you were to imagine a three-dimensional sort of hourglass type shape, but not with a flat top, more with the rounded figure 8 top, right? If you could imagine a three-dimensional hourglass like that with light moving around inside of it, right, in that infinite pattern. That's what we're talking about basically when we're talking about what's going on inside of an Eva. That also represents in many ways time. Not directly, but sort of symbolically, and you'll see why that is as we go forth. Now, all of this is happening, right, and what's, there's a common understanding that energy is neither created nor destroyed, and I'm happy to report that this new theory doesn't change that idea, but it does kind of push it a little bit in the sense that there is now a new dimension called the aether. Okay, now the aether is the dimension which is responsible for managing light energy. So it's manifestation into our reality and whatever happens to it when it unmanifests, right, where it goes back to from whence it came. Well, it all goes and comes from the aether, which is sort of a giant cosmic battery of sorts, okay? I can't really describe it three-dimensionally because I don't know that that's possible. All I know is that it exists, it's there, and this is where we're getting this light matter from. Now, I don't know if if you could really simplify it in this way, but I'm not an expert on dimensional physics, but it seems to me that the aether, based on what I am seeing, is actually based upon three separate pieces, which may end up, being three different dimensions, but I'm not really sure beyond a shadow of a doubt at this point. That needs more investigation. But there's three components to the aether. There are two, what I will call female components, okay? And there's one male component. Now, this male component sits in the middle, that's the atomus, and the female components sit on the outside of the atomus in order to kind of keep that element, that energy, in check, to kind of keep that infinite energy potential from destroying the universe, if you want to call it that, right? It's got to keep a balance. So it's funny to me, and I'm sure some of my female friends will appreciate this. It's funny to me that at the end of the day, it all comes down to two females keeping a male in check that basically is responsible for keeping the fabric of space-time together, symbolically at least. So anyways, here we have these three components of the aether. We've got the infinite atomus sandwiched between two female sort of guardians, which are keeping that polarized and held in the middle, sort of like a magnet, up until the point in which it's needed, and at that point it is extracted from the aether and interjected into our intersection of reality, and it may come forth in different ways. I'd like for you to consider for a moment that it's possible for light to come forth in sort of an unassembled light particle. Okay, not a wave which is assembled like what we're thinking of in visual light and UV and all these other types of EM stuff. I'm talking about an unassembled light particle, and that we, people, plants, humans, everything around us is effectively built of light particles which have been assembled in some type of geometric pattern. Most of these patterns could probably actually be broken down into a few basic shapes. I know Socrates had talked a little bit about this. He kind of speculated that everything is actually made out of like circles, squares, and triangles at the end of the day. It's kind of an interesting theory, but we don't have to get into that. The point is, the aether is what is behind the energy source. It is a very important part of this game, and it is also why the symbolic forces behind the aether and the cosmic forces behind the aether have been, as you will see, sort of messed with. Okay, not only has pi been manipulated, but there's been some things in the sort of cosmic spiritual realm, if that's something you resonate with, related to the aether and what I call the false light, which are sort of being brought to the surface at this point, and they're going to get sorted out. Okay, but this is why actually we've kind of had a lot of suppression of free energy. This is actually why we've had a lot of misery in our world recently, is as a result of this dimensional construct sort of being tampered with on a couple different symbolic levels. So now, the aether would make then the fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensions if they were three, otherwise just the fourth. But I actually, my gut feeling tells me that they're three, but I could be wrong about it. Either way, that's what it is. That's the aether, and it's already had a symbol for a very long time, the symbol AE. Make sure when you draw the symbol AE that you don't do it like most AE symbols are drawn, where the line for the E is mismatched for that of the A. Make sure the A and the E's middle line are the same line going across. Okay, you're going to find out that these symbols have been manipulated over time. By whom, I can only speculate, but the truth is they've manipulated them quite severely and hidden very carefully certain letters from the Greek alphabet and other letters over time. I've spent a lot of time just investigating every single alphabet that we basically had on Earth, going through every single character to see what the pattern was of removal, and it was very interesting to see how certain shapes were systematically targeted for removal in different languages and had been done so. It's really interesting. Basically, look at the Greek alphabet and the letters that they removed from that versus the English alphabet, and you'll get a pretty good idea of some of the types of shapes that they're looking to avoid. Now, why would they not want us to have, certain letters like a capital G? Why would they not want us to have that? What does that mean? Well, the capital G, not to get off on a tangent, actually has some interesting functions which you can do with it. But the point is, know that when you're doing this, these symbols that I'm showing you are the modified symbols, the ones that I have changed, not the ones that you're going to probably see if you're to go look up physics symbols online. So do with that what you will. All right, here. So I'm kind of getting distracted. Let me see. So we got this marriage union between Adam and Eve, right? You got these atoms that are bouncing around inside of the omega structure, right? Or the, in a way, I guess you could, it's kind of, well, I won't even say that. I'll let the scientists weigh in with that one. But I think there's some stuff going on where you could say that this is going on not only in the real world, but you could also be doing this while you're generating free energy. Sort of a mirror version of this could be going on in the aether at the same time. Although obviously it would be very difficult for me to prove that. It seems, based on everything else being in a sort of system of opposite systems and duality, that would be the case, and there's a lot of mirroring in things and deeper levels of meaning in all of this stuff, so it just would not surprise me. But the point is, these atoms are bouncing around in there. There's some struggle to get out, at which point in time they eventually do output. Okay. Now there's a finite amount of atoms within the omega. All right, I believe that the additional ones are then generated from within there, so then you get a new amount of finite atoms within that omega structure, okay, which is always changing as long as you're generating. And you have different ways that you could do this. You could actually interject those atoms which are generated back into the omega, okay, keep them churning around. You could not let them leave, right? That would create a different effect. You could get them going really fast and build up a ton of them, and then you could shove them through a really weird angle or funnel or struggle point in order to create different types of effects, like an hourglass does, right? All of these are different things, and bearing in mind that these are light now, they will also respond to various types of other light that intersect with it. So if you were to take a pure white light and shine a red light into it, you're going to notice obviously that light becomes sort of rosy or pinkish. It's going to be different than white. All right, so you can create different types of resonances and harmonics and alterations of entropy and generation of energy by messing with these harmonics and frequencies and resonances. There's a guy who actually had a video, and I don't know if it's available anymore, but he used, I think his name was Hutchinson. He ended up using sound waves, which were directed in sort of a cone at objects in a booth at a pretty high decibel rating, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, he had used this thing, which sort of looked like a microphone, but it projected stuff outward to levitate various objects off the ground, and it was quite amazing. All right, so you want to talk about anti-gravity. This is sort of one of the first keys to what I'm talking about, okay? Everything is about energy, harmonics, and frequency, and resonance, and understanding that these things are being influenced by these all the time, whether we realize it or not. And if you understand that they respond to the influence of these things, we can then stand in the middle and choose how they influence them in a perfect controlled system in order to create the result we're looking for. That's the name of the game. So basically what is going on is that you have the aether, right? And then you've got that divided by the union of Adam and Eve, which is generating potential, right? So that whole thing, parentheses squared, plus 3D space. Now D, in this instance, okay, I know it's going to be a little confusing here. I'm actually using D in this context to stand for dimensions, okay? So there are basically 7 dimensions in space-time, right? And actually, I see I have time listed here as the 4th dimension. So like I said, I'm not sure exactly the perfect order for what the dimensions list or what they're stacked in. All I know is that this is the structure of them that I have been shown and indeed strongly led to believe. and that time and space together effectively make 7 total dimensions, and you can break these apart into individual dimensions throughout your formulas and move them around to make things more convenient for you. Now let me repeat that and kind of explain what I'm saying. This is a sort of theoretical physics which acts a little bit differently than regular mathematics. So if you want to move some stuff around to make your life easier, you should just go ahead and do it. And you can split apart dimensions, and you can do whatever the heck your little heart desires if it makes it more possible to solve your formula. And when you do that, you're going to find some really interesting results. So that's why I have 3D and 4D split apart here, is because although I could just represent this whole thing, okay, as that, 7D, I don't want to, because I manipulate these things in my equation to get different results. And I think you will find that is what you will be doing as well. Also, it perfectly demonstrates sort of the fractured nature of our reality that we exist in, all right? Because we are in sort of this 3-dimensional construct. And if we're being honest with ourselves, it is based purely upon perception of light, which is processed by our brain. We can't really be sure what we're looking at because our brain could be lying to us. I mean, honestly, there's no way for us to know. Now, I just want to actually stop here. I had a little bit of an ADD moment, but this is a really important topic that I need to discuss with you since I have your attention now. When I was reading Gematria last night, one of the first things that came up was the word event horizon. Some of you are familiar with that term, all right, but in this context, I need to explain to you about a very real possible event horizon which may be in our future that is quite stark and alarming, okay? And I need to kind of raise the red flag here to get some people looking at this science because I have a very strong feeling that this is true. So imagine for a moment that our Earth is indeed, or I should say our multiverse is indeed like a giant floating infinity symbol that's like 3-dimensional. Okay, so it's like a giant floating rounded hourglass in space-time. Now within this, on the top and the bottom, there is a finite amount of energy, right? We can agree on that. Let's just call that sand. So we have a finite amount of sand on the top and on the bottom. Great. So now, assuming for a moment that what I'm saying about the aether and its existence is true, consider that in this multiverse hourglass structure which we have crafted in our imagination, we can indeed pull more sand into this hourglass from this aether structure. And we can pull an infinite amount into it. Now, this will have an interesting effect, okay? It is glass, but at the same point, because we're talking about a new theoretical physics here, we're going to say that this glass is sort of pliable and can blow out like a balloon, all right? So as we create more energy, right, or create more energy potential, which is unrealized, we start to swell out the balloon on whatever side of the hourglass that energy potential happens to be manifested in. Following me so far? Okay, good. So now we can create an infinite amount of that. When we destroy quote-unquote energy, which doesn't really happen, but when we quote-unquote de-manifest it, it goes back into the place from which it came, thusly shrinking the bubble. Now, if all that is true, consider a situation for a moment, and what I want you to consider is what would happen if these set of conditions occurred, assuming all these things are true. Let us say for a moment that the ability to realize potential energy on one side of this dimensional structure was artificially limited. Okay, so let's say we had the ability to generate a lot of potential, but it could not escape the omega, basically. Like it kept swelling up inside its own little bubble. The struggle was too high. It's basically capped off like a cork. Now, what if it were the case that this hourglass system needed to be in sort of an ebb and a flow that needed to maintain balance? what if, and I'm just theorizing, but what if it was that the energy which we were pulling actually came from the other side of this hourglass? It's conceivably possible. I'm not 100% sure, but let's assume for the sake of this discussion that that were the case. So if we're generating potential energy, but we're not realizing it, what that would effectively mean is that you're taking sand from one side of the hourglass and you're not giving it back. Okay, like it stays on the one side. It doesn't normally seem like a bad thing. That's kind of like what an hourglass does, right? Well, hear me out here. What happens to our multi-dimensional construct when the very last grain of sand is gone from one side? Theoretically, what do you think would happen? I have a pretty good idea of what I think would happen. I think it's a sort of evolutionary fail-safe system, if I may be so bold as to say. I think that whatever created our universe, whoever knew that its time would need to be taken in order to get its stuff together to be self-perpetuating. And by it, I mean us. It would no doubt probably come down to some severe events, some extinction level type events. And I theorize that this is indeed the source of what we would consider the Big Bang. Except I think what we have is actually more of like a Big Bang squared. The beginning and the end. Now, this Big Bang could be physical through the cosmos. It also could be ethereal through the energy structures. I'm not sure which, but I actually theorize that this sort of Big Bang, which I'm discussing now, is actually more ethereal in nature, although I'm sure there could be a counterpart physical Big Bang, and likely is. This Big Bang, which I'm referring to now, which would be an event coinciding with the last piece of sand in the hourglass reaching the event horizon, this Big Bang would reset all life in this dimension back to nothing again, to start over. I have been led strongly to believe that this has happened actually several times, that this would be the fifth or so time now. Now imagine for a moment that pi is indeed limiting our potential. And if that's the case, you could sort of take that pi symbol and stick it in the middle of this hourglass structure. Imagine that now as sort of like a cork in a wine bottle, allowing energy to, in this instance, travel sort of one way, but not the other. So we can generate all kinds of potential. We're having a hard time outputting it. We're pulling a lot of sand, right, from the bottom or the top, or however you want to view it, from your angle, pulling a lot of sand from the other side. Now, I actually have wondered and have been concerned if that may not indeed have some very real effects, and if there is not indeed some part of ourselves which is mirrored within this other side of the hourglass structure, although I cannot be sure. If it were the case that we had another part of ourselves separated there, then it seems to me that the most likely explanation is that this would be what many people would call our soulmate. And that we're spending our life trying to get back to a position where we're no longer out of phase. Because we have one side, which is sort of three-dimensional, and another side, which is sort of four-dimensional, creating this flux. Okay, this is directly related to Euclid's problem. This is directly related to the solving of pi and the suppression of man's potential. If you were to hold your hand up in front of your face and look at something at the wall well past your hand, if at this moment you were to notice you have actually two hands which are being presented to you visually, and this sort of simulates exactly what it is that we are experiencing right now. When people talk about having sight, when people talk about seven-dimensional viewing, that is kind of what they are referring to. And geometric patterns bring this phenomenon out in a very tangible way, which is why geometry is sort of irresistible to the human intellect in many ways, because we're drawn to this truer, unfazed reality, this original reality which we were deprived of after the fall of man, if you believe in that sort of thing. Nonetheless, this is represented by Euclid's problem, and if my theory about this is correct, although I cannot be certain, it seems to me that it would be our soulmate that would be on the other side of this, and that we are basically living in what would be called the land of Nod in the Bible, okay, and in several other traditions. The land of Nod being the land of sleep, literally. It's not to say we're living in some kind of physical matrix, although one might be able to make that argument. The truth is, we are not really 100% ourselves or realizing our full potential, not only on a personal level, but on a multiverse level. And this entire experience, which we are all going through right now, geopolitically, in our families, with coronavirus, spiritually, everything else is all related to this same idea finally being rectified. This 3D, 4D shift is going to be resolved because it is time. I believe I was given this information at this specific time for this reason, because of this fact. So everything's based on pi, right? So like all of our mechanical design, all of our machining is done based on pi. So anything that we make with pi is going to be inaccurate. Now, I don't have all the math skills that I would like to be perfectly honest with you, but I do have good sense of space and visual awareness and relationships, and I have calculated about 6 different ways in which we can calculate the precise number for pi. I don't know which of these is going to be the best, but they're all pretty close, I think. I just need somebody with a little more experience to look at them than I. Now, in the beginning, I had determined that I had come up with what I thought at the time was a new formula for pi. I am not 100% sure if it is or if it is not. It is indeed an interesting learning tool that will get us closer to the true understanding of light and its circular motion. It also visually represents, in a very interesting way, sort of the nature of our world, which is sort of like an egg, right, or an hourglass like we were talking about. Imagine an hourglass inside of an egg. That's an even better visualization. The egg is also like the parentheses in the mathematical formulas, right? So here in this formula where I start talking about time and potential and space and the perfect radius of, the perfect circumference of a circle using radials, what I have here is an equation. It's 4RD equals big egg-shaped parenthesis 999 over 1,000 squared over 3D, end parenthesis. So you have like this whole thing of this multiverse split universe thing, which is inside of an egg, and that's even visually represented right there in the equation. You're going to see what I'm talking about here really soon. This is all symbolic on multiple levels. And if you think about this, you need to think about it not just as a mathematician, not just as a scientist, but digging into the other creative avenues of your life as well, in thinking about the connections and the relationships and the correlations outside of normal three-dimensional thinking. Just recognizing the fact that an equation might look like an egg, which might look like the structure of our universe, is a large logical leap for many people, but it's clear as day to me. Now, I want to explain very carefully here about the aether and why I chose in this equation to use 999 over 1,000. That's very, very important. You see, the aether can be sort of like a metaphor of your car's odometer. Now visualize that you're driving down the road with your car, and you look down at the odometer and you notice that the little mile thing, the white number, is at 9, right? Like it's about to flip over. Let's also say for a moment that you're on mile 99,999, so you're about to hit the big number, right? It's the moment. So what happens then? Let's really break it down. What happens when that number flips from 9? What's going on? Well, what we're really doing is we're adding one digit, right? Like we're taking, it doesn't actually go from 9 to 0. It goes from 9. We're adding another one. It would become 10. But it flips all the numbers over on the odometer, right? So 99,999 becomes 100,000.0. That is the effect of simultaneous creation and destruction, which is exactly what the aether does. Simultaneous creation and destruction is the name of the game for free energy, okay? This is where a lot of the magic is happening, or I should say the miracle, because it really is a miracle of nature. It's available to us everywhere we look, not limited by geography or ability to catch the wind or the sun. Many of you have maybe not heard of a small Christian community, and I think it is in Switzerland. I'd have to verify, and I know I'm going to butcher the name, but if you look this up, the scientist guy who is behind it, his name is Paul Baumann. The community's name, I believe, is Maranithma. It is a small Christian community which operates a free energy device which can fit on a kitchen table, and this singular free energy device powers an entire town. This has been around since the 70s. This is exactly the same technology which I'm talking about here. They have refused to release that, saying that the world was not yet responsible to possess this knowledge. Well, I don't blame them. I don't really think we were at the time. I do, however, think that times have changed and we need to level the playing field for the first time ever and take back our future. And we could use this information to destroy ourselves, or we could use it to propel ourselves into a new era of freedom. And that's what I'd like us to do. So, simultaneous creation and destruction. We're adding 1 to 999 to get 1,000. So we're destroying 3 nines after adding a 1 and getting out 1 and 3 zeros. This perfectly demonstrates what goes on with the aether, okay? It's that flip, that potential which we were pulling from. Okay, that simultaneous creation and destruction. which relates to entropy, struggle, challenge, curvature, frequency, harmonics, all of it. The possibilities truly are infinite. And I say infinite instead of infinite because you will come to realize how infinite actually means infinite, within a finite loop. Infinite, or to infinity and beyond, is outside of a finite loop. This is what we would consider over unity, I do believe. Now, it's actually really interesting. I think I came up with this idea of 999 before I really had a good understanding of numerology, but I had a very strong suspicion that 999 was a significant, important number. And I also theorized it was an important number because it was the inverse number of a number we all know very well, 666. I figured to myself, well, if 666 is the imperfect number, maybe 999 is the perfect number. I actually found out later that's not exactly true. Really what we need to do is find a balance more than anything. Maybe that's the answer. Now that I think about it out loud, maybe the answer isn't to do 999 over 1,000. Maybe the answer is to find some type of balance in between 999 and 666 and do something similarly. But again, I'm not a mathematician. I just want to help you guys understand so that we can take this thing to the next level together. So the infinity symbol is actually symbolized by one of the letters that they took out of the Greek alphabet. Indeed, a very important sigil for a variety of different causes. This is the infinity symbol. It's sort of an E with a loop-de-loop in the middle, which almost looks like a sideways curvy W. Okay, they have sort of a variation of this in the Greek alphabet, like a W with a line over it. But like any letter which they kept, which is useful, they altered it in some way to make it useless. And so this is the real symbol, along with the A and the omega. Now, I've actually further speculated that the order of these has actually been shifted around quite a bit. And so while I am using the original terminologies and names for these things as they've been given, I do suspect that later on, once we get a more clear understanding, that these things are actually going to change, because it seems to me that there was a pretty significant effort across many different cultures in order to, like I said, shift around the nature of these things to prevent anybody from discovering them. And so I think the beginning and ending letters of the alphabet, for instance, may be completely different from what they are now. I think we may actually have one more vowel than what we have currently. Like, there's a lot of different weird possible things that I need to look into further, but just know that this is all very introductory. This is all very subject to change and interpretation, and by no means should you consider this concrete. Now, in my equations, I usually represent the sort of the bottleneck point as the delta symbol, and I do that for a variety of different reasons. It actually works out very nicely if you take two delta symbols and put them atop of one another, one of them inverted. You will create sort of an hourglass looking shape. Okay. Now the black line, which is in the delta symbol, can actually be manipulated and extended in such a way, as long as you're doing it in the mirror, so that you can actually increase or decrease the amount of space in which things could theoretically travel through them, right? So not only is this mathematically showing something, but we can also show it with art. And it's actually very helpful to use simple drawings like what you see here when you're doing this in order to figure out some of these components. And so I use the delta symbol to represent difficulty or struggle in this case, which in a way is a sort of dimension, which is interesting. But just know that that is what I'm using here, and anytime you see the X symbol that looks like two deltas stacked on top of each other, what I'm referring to is the event horizon, which is sort of like the intersection, right, of where everything comes together in the middle. And time is a very funny thing. There's a lot of possible futures which we could have. But just because they're possible doesn't mean that we're going to actually realize all of them. In fact, we can only realize one of them out of all the possibles out there. If we choose to focus on the terrible futures that are possible, that is precisely what we will receive. If we choose instead to focus on the positive, to focus on the light, of flushing evil from the world, well, then that's what we'll receive. I'd sure rather have the latter. I don't know about you guys. So, that's a little bit on the circular motion of light on free energy. I know I have a lot more to talk about with this. I'm just kind of scratching the surface, but I wanted to get it out there, at least get the process started, because I had that message to me in Gematria last night, and I didn't want to ignore it. Ignoring things that are clear are bad, generally speaking, so I try to avoid doing that. Anyways, I hope you guys are all going to have a great day and that you find this interesting and informative. I will be back with you soon. All right, guys, bye.